Hello my dear friends, you're in the Military Summary channel, and today we will discuss the situation in Ukraine on the 3rd of October of 2023. Today we have a lot of very interesting updates, so let's start. First, we're going to start with Kherson direction. The Russians continue bombing and attacking the Ukrainian positions all over the bank of the Ukrainian side of Dnieper River. The Russians were bombing the cities like Berislav, the Russians were bombing the cities like Lvov, Kazatsk, and so on. So a lot of, as you can see, just Lvov during the previous 24 hours was attacked by the Russians at least 3 times. The Ministry of Defense reported that as a result of those bombings, the Ukrainians lost another 45 soldiers in this area and around 3 armored vehicles and 2 artillery systems. So the level of losses is pretty huge for this area, but anyway, we see that the level of losses has been reduced in comparison with the previous days. So probably the Ukrainians found a solution how to stretch their forces and not to concentrate them at one place. Now we are moving further to Zaporizhzhia direction. Today we got a lot of very interesting details from the Russian side and just one interesting video geolocation from the Ukrainian forces. First, we're going to talk about Robotyne area. Today the Russian sources reported that the Russian forces launched counter-offensive operation in this area, and as a result of those clashes, according to information from the ground, the Russians managed to restore control over the trenches that located between Robotyne and Novoprokopovka. For now, we are not going to change the map because we haven't received more geolocated confirmations, but anyway, this is something like the first update regarding this situation. When talking about Verbova, the Ukrainians stopped any activity in direction of the city. Furthermore, there was a video published by the Russian sources during this video we could see significant number of dead bodies of the Ukrainian forces among the trenches and so on, and sometimes when a Ukrainian soldier needed to pass another 2 or 3 meters, he was forced to bypass around 3 or 4 bodies of Ukrainian soldiers. So the Ukrainians had significant number of losses, and it's very difficult to understand what the Ukrainians are planning to do next. Very interesting picture we received from the fields between Novopokrovka and Verbova. We haven't received almost nothing from this direction for another few months, and starting of today the Russians start bombing and attacking this territory with artillery rounds and shells, and this is very interesting. As I understand, the Ukrainians currently try to concentrate their forces a little bit to the north from the main bridgehead in front of Verbova, and the reason of that is that the Ukrainians don't have chances to concentrate their forces here because they're always under very heavy fire. So that's why they concentrate their forces a little bit to the north, and they just keep on the south a small groups of soldiers whose main job is to hold positions, and if the Russians counterattacks, they need to provide information and to help for some reinforcement. So this is the tactic. Anyway, the Russians are not attacking, and the Ukrainians stop any attempts to storm Verbova. But the Ukrainians currently try to concentrate their forces in front of Nistirianka and Kopany on this area. And we know the purpose of the Ukrainian attack. If they're able to concentrate critical mass, obviously they're going to attack in direction of Nistirianka, and the Ukrainians will try to attack in direction of Kopany. But the Russians control the entire situation, and using FPV drones every single day, the Russians destroy more and more light vehicles, infantry who are heading from one point to another. So not very good situation for the Ukrainians. They need more days, more time to concentrate forces before any attempts to attack further. Furthermore, the situation below this Ukrainian territory is unknown for the Ukrainians because they don't know about the minefields. They need to start everything from the beginning. So for now, no progress for the Ukrainians as well. When talking about the global situation on the front line in this area, today the Russian sources published 2 very interesting videos. The first video is located somewhere in the vicinity of Shiroka, the first geolocated strike. This city is located on the north of Orekhov, and the Russians published how during the reconnaissance operation the Russians managed to discover the concentration and parking of Ukrainian armored vehicles among the tree lines, and as a result of Lancet strike, 1 striker was destroyed. But on the final seconds of this video, we see that Ukrainians took a decision to redeploy their forces from this area because their positions were discovered, and it was very dangerous to keep forces in this area longer. Furthermore, the Russians published another video also even further to the north from the first video, and the second video is coming from the city by the name of Volnyanka. On this video we see how the Russian drone managed to discover the Ukrainian radar that the Ukrainians were using for some air defense purposes, and as a result of Lancet strike that radar was destroyed. So basically from these two videos we can make a lot of conclusions, and the most important one is that the Russians don't have any problems, no matter where, no matter the distance, no matter the range, to attack anything that is static. So if the target is static, the Russians don't have problems to destroy it. But the Russians do have problems to discover and to destroy dynamic targets. And when talking about dynamic units, I'm talking first of all about HIMARS, because today is 3rd of October, and probably since the beginning of this year we haven't received even a single confirmation that the Russians managed to discover and to destroy another HIMARS system. And this is a very bad piece of news, because for example today the Ukrainians published a very interesting video how they managed to discover also the Russian parking of armored vehicles that the Russians were trying to concentrate in the vicinity of the city by the name of Svitle. On this video we can calculate a significant number of armored vehicles, and we see 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 armored vehicles just on this line, 6, 7, so significant number of armored vehicles. Furthermore, they were not just armored vehicles but also ammo depots and so on. And at some second of this video the Ukrainians made a strike, probably using HIMARS system, and as a result of that strike they managed to hit and to damage the local ammo depot. Then there was a secondary detonation, and after a series of secondary detonations, significant number of armored vehicles, ammo depots in this area were destroyed. So this is the usage of HIMARS. Probably in comparison with the previous examples, this one probably the most effective one, because the Ukrainians like to use HIMARS systems against just a single howitzers like D20 or D30, and of course by this attack they managed to achieve significant results, obviously. Now we are moving further to Vremivka tactical bridgehead. We have nothing from this area as well. The same situation as on the Zaporizhzhia area. Just when talking about the Ministry of Defense report, the Russians are saying that as a result of clashes on South Donetsk direction, the Ukrainians lost 120 soldiers during the previous 24 hours, and yesterday, according to the same area, the Ukrainians lost 30 soldiers. So we see that activities in this area intensified during the previous day, and mainly this situation was connected with the Russian counterattacks in the vicinity of Vremivka. So as you can see, when talking about Zaporizhzhia, the Russians made reconnaissance in combat on the south of Rabotino, trying to test the Ukrainians' defense. On Vremivka tactical bridgehead, the Russians attack in direction of Vremivka, and some sources are saying that as a result of that attack, the Russians managed to establish control over 4 strongholds among the fields of this area. We have already discussed this operation in the morning, that the Russians destroyed the bridges, which ruins the Ukrainian collapsed the Ukrainian rotations and support in this area, which allowed the Russians to create a very tricky ambush for the Ukrainians as well. Furthermore, other sources are saying that the Russians launched another reconnaissance in combat in the north of Priutin, and as a result of that attack, the Russians managed to get the edge positions of the Ukrainian forces in the tree lines in the forest on the top of Priutin, and currently there are very heavy clashes. Furthermore, the Ukrainians were forced to step back for another 600 meters to the north from the city. So that wasn't like a real offensive operation, that was another reconnaissance in combat. And as I understand, we see that Ukrainians stopped their offensives all over the combat line. They tried to probably reorganize their forces, to regroup some forces and so on. And currently we see that the Russians start testing the Ukrainians' offensive, and they try to get the answer to the most important question. Maybe it's time for the Russians to attack. The Ukrainians published just few videos from the city by the name of Kremenchuk, how the FPV drone was flying above this territory. They managed to discover some parking of Russian armored vehicles, and as a result of FPV drone strike, few armored vehicles were damaged, nothing special. When talking about the main South Donetsk and Donetsk area, when talking about Novomikhailovka, Mariivka, Krasnogorovka, Avdiivka, today we got a lot of very interesting updates and details from the Russian sources. The Russians continue offensive and storming operation of Novomikhailovka. Today they managed to destroy the local ammo depot along the tree lines on the north of Novomikhailovka as a result of probably artillery strike with Krasnopol rounds, and the Russians bombed Novomikhailovka with FAB 500. 2 bombs arrived in the city as a result of very heavy explosions. Probably the Ukrainians had significant damage, but anyway, we still haven't seen any attempts from the Russian side to attack the city on the ground. There are still a lot of things to do, and obviously the Russians are not going to use their own army for these purposes. Probably, as we discussed, the Russians are going to use Wagner forces for these purposes. Very interesting video we got from the city by the name of Karlovka. On this video, we see how the Russians managed to discover the Ukrainian significant concentration of Ukrainian forces, a lot of armored vehicles, a lot of light vehicles, trucks, a lot of local ammo depots and so on. And I was very surprised when I saw this video, because there are a lot of equipment. Most of these equipment weren't hidden by the Ukrainians, so they were on the open air. And of course, the Russians using their multi-launch rocket system start bombing and attacking, and as a result of those strikes, as you can see, a lot of probably ammo depots and equipment were damaged, which led to significant losses from the Ukrainian side. Probably in a day or two, we're going to receive some update from the Ministry of Defense regarding that attack. So anyway, we understand that the purpose of this attack is to reduce the Ukrainian possibilities of their supporting and supplying their forces on the arc between Nitailovo, Pervomayska and Nivolskaya. So this is a very important area for Russian upcoming possible offensive operation with Wagner forces in direction of Avdiivka. Also, the Russians continue bombing and attacking Avdiivka itself using the guided bombs. The Russians continue ruining and destroying the Ukrainian forces and positions in the northern part of the city in chemical plant. Furthermore, some Russian sources reported that today the Russians also launched reconnaissance and combat operation from Krasnogorovka to the west in direction of the railways and Stepova. So this is the first reconnaissance in combat and enforced operation that the Russians made during the previous 24 hours. The first one in the vicinity of Rabotina, the second one in direction to the north of Priyutina, third one in direction of Urozhaina, and the fourth one attack was made from Krasnogorovka in direction of the railways on the north of Avdiivka. The Russians are testing the Ukrainian defense, and they try to find the weakest point. And as soon as the Russians find the weakest point, they will launch a very significant and powerful attack in this direction. When talking about Donetsk direction, as a result of fierce clashes, bombings and so on, the Ukrainians lost 285 soldiers, 7 armored vehicles and 3 artillery systems. So the level of losses on Donetsk is very heavy in comparison with the previous 2 days, because yesterday the Ukrainians lost 180 soldiers and the day before yesterday 150. So we see that the level of losses has been increased significantly. When talking about the battle for Bakhmut and Klishchiivka, Artyomovsk, I must say that I was surprised when I got all these updates and details from this territory. And the thing is that probably the 3rd of October is the only day when talking about the geolocated videos, the Ukrainians won the Russians in this area. I'm talking about the series of videos that Ukrainians published as a result of counter-artillery duels in the vicinity of Andreevka, Klishchiivka area. You know that Ukrainians launched another series of their pattern. I would discuss that when there are no clashes and when the Ukrainians are not planning to do anything, there is a complete silence on the front line. But when the Ukrainians know that in a week or in a few days they're going to attack, they start bombing and attacking the Russian positions with all types of weapons they have. On this video, we see how the Ukrainians managed first to discover the Russian artillery positions during the battle for Andreevka and the railways, and during the previous 24 hours, they just worked out all those targets. And as a result of those artillery strikes, the Ukrainians managed to destroy up to 3 artillery systems and few armored vehicles right exactly in the vicinity of Klishchiivka, right exactly in the area that Ukrainians are planning to use for the next wave attack attack with one purpose: to cross the railways and to continue their offensive operation in direction of Bakhmut from the south and Opitne as well. Furthermore, the Ukrainians published some videos with FPV drones. They also tried to control the situation. So we see that very high intensifying of action. You need to understand that, for example, the Ukrainians were using their artillery systems to suppress the Russians. Believe me, in a day or in two, all those Ukrainian artillery systems would be destroyed by the Russian artillery systems. They're using like all these things just in one moment, in 1 second. And as soon as they're able to achieve some operational success, some operational superiority, they try to use these benefits as fast as possible with a very powerful and significant attack from their side. So this is their tactic. And during this small period of time, up to 1 or 2 or 3 days, while the Russians try to find a solution how to fix this artillery lack of artillery superiority, the Ukrainians are able to achieve something. So this is their tactics. Furthermore, the Ukrainians increased their pressure in direction of Mayorsk and Nazaryanovka from the south, but the Russians controlled the situation, and today the Russians attacked and destroyed every single movement of the Ukrainians along the tree lines and along the canal that located in this area. But when talking about, of course, significant geolocation, today we got the video from Alexeyevka, Druzhkova. The Russian sources published the video of Iskander strikes against the Ukrainian ammo depot or probably service center in this city. Significant video, significant damage, significant result, and a lot of probably losses from the Ukrainian side. Now we are moving further to Siversk direction. Today we got very interesting video from Spornaya, from this area, and based on this video, as you can see, according to my previous version of this map, this area was under Ukrainian control, but today we got a video that somehow, as a result of some offensives, probably the Russians managed to force the Ukrainians to step back, and some Russian soldiers were trying to dig in deeper, create more trenches, and they were under fire of Ukrainian FPV drones, which confirms that this area probably is under Russian control, and before the next video we will update this territory under the Russian color. Now we are moving to Kupiansk-Liman front line, and we also got a lot of updates on this direction. When talking about the level of losses, there are no changes, just Kupiansk shown us a little bit bigger numbers than usual. 60 soldiers on the Kupiansk front line and 65 on Liman front line, loss of Ukrainian forces. And when talking about the interesting videos, today the Ukrainians also published another video how using the drone they managed to discover the Russian positions, the Russian artillery system Getsint-S, and we see how the Russian soldiers were moving from one tree to another. This system the Russians were using to support their forces in Crimea, and as a result of HIMARS strike, that system was destroyed. So we also can make few conclusions. The first one is that Ukrainians also don't have problems to attack and destroy the static Russian targets. And another conclusion that we can make is that Ukrainians do have possibilities to fly very far in the very far rear of the combat line with drones and to have a very nice picture above the territory of Russian Federation. We saw this in the area of Crimea, and the same thing we saw in the vicinity of Tokmak, how the Ukrainians were tracking the Russian armored vehicles that the Russians were trying to hide along the tree line. So this is not very good for the Russians. They also need to find a solution how to suppress the Ukrainian drones with electronic warfare equipment if they do have some. Very interesting video we got from the area of Makeyevka. For some reason the Russians took a decision to launch another reconnaissance in force or in combat operation from Plashanka in direction of Makeyevka. But when talking about the previous attempts, the Russians were using just like infantry or very small squads, platoons for those purposes. But when talking about Makeyevka, the Russians were using armored fists, at least 2 tanks. The Russian launched attack using 2 tanks. They were trying to attack the Ukrainian positions. That was a real reconnaissance in force, but the Ukrainians controlled the entire situation. When the Russian tank entered the fields, the Ukrainians started bombing and attacking them with anti-tank missiles, and as a result of those clashes, the Russians lost 2 tanks. But for example, from this one tank, probably one soldier, one tank driver managed to evacuate and to run away from this position. So one more time, during the previous 24 hours, the Russians launched at least 5 reconnaissance operations. The first one in Robotyne to test the Ukrainian defense. The second one in on the Vremivka tactical bridgehead in Priutino and Urozhaine to test the Ukrainian defense and to understand the Ukrainian logistic after they destroyed the bridges in the vicinity of Velika Novoselka. The third reconnaissance operation the Russians launched in the vicinity of Avdiivka, and as we know, according to information we have, the Russians are planning to use Wagner for this attack, and probably this is some kind of preparation before Wagners will be involved in this area. And the final reconnaissance operation took place with tanks on Liman front line, which also is very important, and we'll see what is going to be next. And that's it for today. Military Summary channel reminds we condemn any violence in the world. Thank you for your watching. Subscribe to my channel, put your likes, join my Patreon, and have a good day. Bye bye.